From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's today's lineup. K-State's Sarah Lancaster will discuss the importance of an early pre-plant herbicide treatment against kochia, which is already showing up in Kansas crop fields. She'll go over the herbicide options to consider dependent on the crop to be planted to that ground. Then K-State's Eric Adee reports on the results of his field trials, which evaluated a new soybean seed treatment for protection against sudden death syndrome in soybeans. This new product will be available to you growers for this 2020 growing season. And later on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Jared Hoyle will offer advice on early spring, cool season lawn management. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. As always, we appreciate you being along with us. As we draw somewhat closer now to the growing season in Kansas, for you row crop growers, you'll be thinking about your weed control protocols for the upcoming growing season. And it's a good time to get started on one such objective here, in that the battle against kochia in Kansas has really ramped up in recent years. Joining us once more, weed management specialist Sarah Lancaster of K-State Research and Extension with some pre-plant herbicide considerations against kochia. As you've witnessed it, Sarah, how would you describe the pressure that kochia is bringing to bear out there? It has become a formidable problem around the state, has it not?
I would say, based on my travels and conversations this winter, that kochia is probably second only to Palmer amaranth in terms of the number of farmers that are really struggling. And if they're not struggling, they're certainly aware of the intensity of the management practices that they need to take on in order to get a handle on kochia in their fields.
Let's retrace the steps here. Why has kochia become such a problematic weed out there?
So kochia is a little bit different than some of the other summer annuals that we deal with. It has smaller leaves. It has lots of hairs on the leaves, and that makes it pretty difficult to get post-emergent herbicides into that plant so we get effective control of that weed. So for that reason, we rely on pre-emergent herbicides a lot, but also, in addition to just the biology of the plant, kochia has also developed resistance to a number of herbicides, including things like glyphosate, fluroxapyr, which is a very good product for post-emergent control of kochia. So we really have to work on getting kochia pre-emergent before it comes up.
And when you say pre-emergence, that could be as soon as any time now, right?
Absolutely. So, if you're thinking summer annual crops, corn, sorghum, now is definitely the time. So in my travels around the state, in the last couple of weeks, I've talked to folks who have actually already seen kochia emerging in some of the warmer, sunnier places on their property. So now is definitely the time when you would want to be thinking about those pre-emergent applications.
Stop thinking and start acting soon is the point here. Yep. But what one does in terms of a strategy will depend on what crop is going onto that acreage, correct? There are different product choices for each cropping situation, right?
Absolutely. So, we have to think, when we think about pre-emergent products, we're thinking about products that have soil activity. And so we need to be aware of some of the cropping rotation restrictions with those various products in the soil.
So let's walk through the crops and what producers need to think about in as far as employing a herbicide product. Starting with corn, the first of the spring planted crops to go in here relatively soon for some growers. What are the alternatives that will suit the need here?
So, dicamba is a product that we typically think of as being a post-emergent product, but it does have a small bit of soil activity, which can actually be very helpful for controlling kochia. So dicamba can be an important component of pre-weed control for kochia, but it's best when it's combined with atrazine. That atrazine plus dicamba is a good option for corn or sorghum. If you're not thinking sorghum, if you're only thinking corn, another option might be products that contain a herbicide called isoxafludol, which is sold as Balance Flex is an example of that product. Those types of products, again, with a little bit of atrazine, can provide some good control of kochia in those situations.
Now, there is another product that could be utilized if special local use is granted.
Right. So that product you're referring to, I think, is Kochia. Mm-hmm. And it's another isoxafludol product. And one of the things that's unique about that is it does have a special local needs label for use in fallow. So, not only do we have to think about fields that are in continuous cropping rotations, we have to think about managing kochia during that fallow period as well. And so Kochia can be a tool for that.
But it does have a plant-back restriction, that product, so that may limit its utility for some producers.
Absolutely. So again, in that fallow period, just making sure you're aware of those rotation restrictions.
Well, let's look at if one is going to go to sunflowers, and we do have producers who might be opting that direction. What's the best approach here?
So for sunflowers, we have a few different options. One of the most effective options would be herbicides that contain sulfentrazone. So Spartan is an example of that. So in some studies that were done out at Tribune, Spartan applied at 6 ounces to the acre provided good control of kochia through mid-May.
But noting one of the highlighted options for kochia control, dicamba, would not be a good choice ahead of sunflowers, apparently.
That's right. So again, that dicamba does have a small amount of soil activity. And so if you're trying to go with sunflowers, that dicamba could cause some crop injury.
What about ahead of soybeans then? And glyphosate could be used in the mix here, you say?
So, glyphosate can be an option there. Again, we have a lot of glyphosate-resistant kochia in the state, but glyphosate could be an option. If you're early enough, you can go, again, with some dicamba in that situation. Some other options might be things like metribuzin. Metribuzin products can provide that control of kochia going out a little longer into the season. We've got some data here that shows that metribuzin mixed with isoxafludol can provide some good control of kochia all the way out through mid-June.
So those are some of the options for soybeans, but actually a producer could dig into a list of products if one is careful about the rain activity that would be available to that application, right?
So pre-emergent products often do require an amount of rainfall in order to be effective. So some of the products that we have looked at that have decent activity would be something like Zidua. But Zidua is very sensitive to the amount of rain required for activation. So that may or may not be a fit. If you're in the situation, the dicamba-atrazine combination or products containing sulfentrazone tend to be a little more efficacious. Another product that we've mentioned briefly would be something like a metribuzin-containing product. The catch with those is that they're particularly sensitive to high pH soils, and they may cause crop injury. So you need to be sure that you're on label in terms of soil characteristics when you choose to use metribuzin.
Sarah, looking a little further ahead, if one has ground that will be planted to wheat this fall, it'll be in fallow perhaps, atrazine should not be considered an option, you say?
There's technically no label for atrazine use in fallow for this purpose. So, as most of the listeners are probably aware, atrazine gets a lot of scrutiny in terms of its effects in the environment and the ability to show up in water supplies. And so we try to limit the use of that product to those situations where it's going to have the greatest benefit to farmers. And so those are going to be in crop situations, specifically corn and sorghum.
So for fall planted wheat ground then, what would be a good alternative to treat now?
Again, things like the dicamba, the metribuzin that we've mentioned. We've mentioned Balance Flex. Those would be some good examples of products that, again, could go ahead of wheat.
Now, we've gone through quite a few alternatives for producers to consider depending on their cropping rotation, what their intentions are for that acreage in the near or longer term for that matter. What they need to do is study what's in the Chemical Weed Control Guide from K-State, the 2020 version. All of the old and newer alternatives have been evaluated by K-State. And, Sarah, that information would be included in that guide, would it not?
Absolutely. You know, that K-State Weed Control Guide has historically been a very excellent resource, and we intend to continue having it as a good resource for producers going forward. So, yeah, always you can look at that weed control guide, and the caveat there, the label is the law. Always double-check things against the label.
Don't forget to use that as a reference. But once more, as we finish up here, to remind producers they do need to get on Kochia as soon as possible to have any chance at reasonably good control of it, meaning any time now.
Any time now. Absolutely. Any time now.
Very well. Thanks for coming over as always. As we enter the cropping season, not too long from now, we'll have you back frequently to talk more about herbicide alternatives for producers. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Eric.
Sarah Lancaster, Weed Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Some of the options that you producers can look at in as far as early season pre-plant kochia control on your crop ground. And we'd note there is a quite comprehensive article that covers in detail every one of the herbicide options that Sarah went over with us here and more. That is part of the Agronomy E-Update newsletter series, the edition which was posted a couple of weeks back on Friday, February the 14th. Go have a look at that, as well as the latest Chemical Weed Control Guide from K-State, all at agronomy.ksu.edu. When we come back, a look at another tool that you soybean growers can use in your battle against sudden death syndrome disease in your bean production. More on that next here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today is back now on the K-State Radio Network. And now information for you soybean growers, and in particular, those of you who have been combating a devastating condition in your beans, or potentially so, in recent years. It's called sudden death syndrome. It's a condition that has really raked over yields in those fields that are stricken by that disease. Talking now with Eric Adee. Eric is the agronomist in charge of the Kansas River Valley Experiment Field for Kansas State University, just outside of Topeka. Eric has just come off of an evaluation this past year of a soybean seed treatment for SDS. But Eric, to further explain just how much of a headache SDS has become for our soybean growers, quite a concern, isn't it?
Yes, it has. For a lot of the growers here in the irrigated river valley, it has really hurt their soybean yields to a point where some of them are kind of opting out of growing soybeans just because their yields were hurt pretty bad. And typically we can see yield losses up to 25%, but on some very severe years and very isolated in certain fields, we can have even more yield loss. So
now, just to point out, SDS is a problem in the Kansas River Valley. It's not contained just to that region, though. We're seeing this more and more elsewhere in the state, aren't we, in eastern Kansas anyway, Eric?
Right, and there's some in south central Kansas. Last year, possibly because of all the rain we had it showing up in fields that had never had it before, up in our hill fields, the dryland fields, where normally we don't see it. But last year it showed up, so I'm not sure what that's going to mean for the future, if it's, once it's established, if it's going to keep showing up, but we'll have to wait and see. But it is associated with wet soil conditions at the wrong time. Generally, just prior to bloom into June is where we've seen wet saturated soils right about that time, right before bloom, is generally when we see that trigger starting the SDS showing up later generally in August.
And this is why we see it with some frequency in irrigated situations then.
Right. Yeah. But last year it showed up in some dryland fields where we hadn't seen it before. That's just not a normal occurrence. It is a devastating disease. There hasn't been a lot of options to control it. There is no resistance to the disease. We do have some varieties who are a little more tolerant, but they'll still get the disease and suffer yield loss. So we've been looking for a number of different avenues to control this disease, to help make soybeans more profitable. We need soybeans at least somewhere in the crop rotation to help manage other diseases and weeds and issues like that. But so a few years ago, we did, through trials we had done for companies, we did find that a product from Bayer called Olivo did very well at reducing the severity and increasing the yield with sudden death syndrome.
This is a seed treatment product out there, right?
Yes, it's a seed treatment. It's been used quite a bit. Even in the absence of sudden death syndrome, it has shown a 2 to 3 bushel yield increase, and that partially could be because it also is effective at reducing the severity of soybean cyst nematode, another disease that's very hard to manage against. And the soybean cyst nematode and SDS, sudden death syndrome, are associated. There is association between them. So Olivo was a very good product to help reduce the severity and yield loss, and it's helped for several years here.
But this past year, you had the opportunity to examine and evaluate yet another seed treatment product that could be additionally considered here. Talk about that, if you would.
Yes. Syngenta has asked us to do a study with looking at seed treatments, and we have a number of companies ask us to look at seed treatments because, it takes a while to develop products and to get them to the marketplace. And they had asked me to do this trial, and we set it up with not the most susceptible varieties, but they're good varieties, and we put it in a field where we've had SDS in the past, and we kind of planted early, which we know favors SDS, more severe, the earlier it's planted. So we were trying to make the disease happen. We never know for sure how severe it's going to be, but it did show up. It showed up much later than normal. It showed up about the middle of August, but when it did, it reached a high level of severity very quickly. And it got some of the check plots were over 50% within a week or so of infested defoliation.
So you examined this product. Its brand name is what then?
It was a numbered compound when I was looking at it, but they are releasing it on the market. It's called Saltro, Saltro. And through the ratings, it became very apparent. I have a blind map, so I don't know what the treatments are, but it became very apparent there were big differences between the treatments. And it shakes out when we get the yields that the yields corresponded with the severity of the disease. And we had Olivo in there as well, and both of them increased the soybean yield considerably over the check and reduced the severity of sudden death syndrome.
To put it more tangibly here, Eric, what degree of yield increase are we talking of here in bushels, in numbers?
The check in this study, it's in an e-bulletin. You can see the actual data, but the check was just under 60 bushel, which is a good soybean year, but it needs to be higher to make a good profit. Olivo was 66 bushel, and the Saltro treatments were over 70, close to 71 bushel.
So you are talking a substantial enough increase in yields to make the treatment worthwhile, it would appear.
Yes. Even though soybean prices have been down, this is a significant increase in yield, and I don't know the exact price of what the product would be, but I think the first couple of bushels would have paid for this product, even at these lower prices.
It's important, though, to use either of these two seed treatments that are now going to be out there with the new edition this year in combination with the resistance ratings of a given variety to offer the best defense against sudden death syndrome?
Yeah, that's correct. First is selecting varieties. You want to get something with the most tolerance you have to sudden death and also with the most resistant you can get to cyst nematode because of the association. We know that varieties that have good resistance to cyst nematode actually get less SDS. Mm-hmm. And then in combination with the seed treatment, I think we can get soybeans more consistently on the profitable side of the ledger there.
Now, noting, Eric, that you have put this product through the paces in only 1 year's worth of trials, so there aren't multi-years of data to rest on here. What does that suggest to you and as far as producers' interest and willingness in trying this out?
Just for me, I like to see things more than 1 year just to see what happens, but I know this product's been tested extensively with very similar results, but I think we're going to be doing another seed treatment study with the same product again this year. So we like to see consistency over years, but this was very promising, a very promising start. So.
Especially given, as you've noted earlier, the wetness of this past growing season, 2019.
Correct.
Yeah. So you say the data is available. If producers would like to have a look at the numbers in this evaluation, where might they find that, Eric?
Okay, they can go to agronomy, K-State Agronomy, and go to the e-updates, and it's the February 21st issue. Mm-hmm. And it's listed in there as one of the articles in that issue.
And that is this past Friday, as a matter of fact, the 21st. What you're looking for by title there, evaluating a new soybean seed treatment to control sudden death syndrome in Kansas, in soybeans in this state, and again, testing the new product that goes by the name of Saltro, and side-by-side with the previous product called Alivo, in as far as their abilities to keep SDS suppressed in our soybean production and help along with those yields in those areas prone to that disease. So good work as always, Eric. Thanks for letting us know about it, and we'll catch up with you again very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Eric Adee is the agronomist in charge of K-State's Kansas River Valley Experiment Field. That would be just outside of Topeka, and this is where they conducted this research in 2019, testing out the merits of these sudden death syndrome treatment products on soybean seed. And, of course, if you haven't settled on the soybean variety or varieties that you intend to plant this spring, we'd certainly advise you as well to check out K-State's variety performance data from the 2019 field trials around the state. That report is packed with good information on, obviously, yield performance and the individual variety traits that lend to that. You can ask about a hard copy of the report through your local extension office, or you can go online and find all of that information right there at the agronomy.ksu.edu website out of the K-State Department of Agronomy. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. We'll stand aside now for a few moments. When we come back, today's agricultural news headlines coming your way. Also, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update with Greg Akagi, followed by this week's K-State Horticulture segment. All of that still ahead here on the K-State Radio Network. Please stay with us. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and our Thursday edition of Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Now today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Commodity experts attending something called the International Sweetener Colloquium in California this week signaled that the announcements of the spread of the coronavirus and the fall of the stock market are making them uncertain about the future. Following the stock decline and concerns about the coronavirus from the Centers of Disease Control, the president held a news conference yesterday seeking to diffuse fears about the virus. Still, analysts speaking at this International Sweetener Colloquium Petroleum raised concerns about the economic problems created by the global spread of the virus. In China, for instance, they note instead of going to restaurants, people are buying vegetables in food stores and taking them home to cook, which will really affect the restaurant business. That according to Stephen Nicholson, a senior analyst for Rabo AgriFinance. Tourism, he notes, is also coming to a halt. Quoting Nicholson here, we have to be ready for more volatility as we see trade disrupted. He went on to say, again quoting, we are going to see economic activity contracted. There's a little more downside than we had thought, in his words. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue is urging farmers now not to expect another year of market facilitation program or trade aid payments. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue moved to clarify comments on whether there will be another round of market facilitation program payments in 2020.
You saw the tweet, maybe seen the tweet from the president the other day. There was a big two-letter word at the front of that I don't think people, producer farmers, look at. What was that word? If.
He told a gathering of the National Association of State Directors of Agriculture that the if is if trade deals with China don't materialize.
But we are expecting them to. I'm kind of assuming the close with China. They're going to live up to that hardline commitment of purchases they made and expect them to do that.
So in terms of what to expect,
think of it as a trade disruption program, not a price support program on market facilitation. That's why I'm telling people not to expect it. Plan for the markets to their situation.
The program has provided aid to farmers for 2 years to make up for trade losses. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The Trump administration has now decided to limit the small refinery exemptions under the renewable fuel standard based on that January court ruling that the EPA overstepped its bounds in granting 3 SREs for the 2016 compliance year. The EPA is now expected to apply the ruling by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals nationwide. This according to a report from Bloomberg. It cited sources familiar with the internal discussions. This would mean that only a few small refiners would be granted the exemptions, as the court ruling indicated that the EPA erred in granting the waivers, as they were not extensions of waivers that had been granted in 2010. EPA data showed a sizable increase in the level of exemptions granted, starting with the 2016 compliance year. The EPA data posted showed that the agency approved 8 out of the 16 exemptions sought for the 2013 compliance year, 8 of 13 sought for the 14 compliance year, and 7 of 14 sought for the 2015 compliance year. And you agricultural producers and private landowners interested in the Conservation Reserve Program 2020 general sign-up must make an offer of acres or schedule an appointment to do so with your local USDA service center by tomorrow. The general sign-up opened back in December. It's available to producers and landowners who are either offering for the first time or reoffering acres for another 10 to 15-year term in the general CRP. FSA Administrator Richard Fordyce said as long as you have an appointment scheduled by the end of the business day tomorrow, your CRP offer will be able to compete in this general sign-up, even if the appointment is in the first week of March next week. The CRP currently has about 22 million acres enrolled, but the 2018 Farm Bill raised the cap to 27 million acres in fiscal 2023. The cap for fiscal year 2020 is 24.5 million acres. Again, get this business taken care of by a visit right away to your local USDA service center. Next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update with Greg Akagi. Greg?
John Ray is joining us. He is the Kansas Soybean Commission's representative to and the vice chairman of the Soy Aquaculture Alliance. John, you recently attended the Soy Aquaculture Alliance board meeting and the Aquaculture America conference in Hawaii. What was your impression of what you heard and saw of the aquaculture industry?
The aquaculture industry is quite large. We've seen presentations from anywhere from freshwater to marine fish to shrimp to oysters and clams. And there was 2 presentations that actually tied back to Kansas. There was one presentation on trout, that they are being fed soy, and breeding lines are being selected on their tolerance to soy, and it's very promising. And another one was actually funded by the Kansas Soybean Commission, and it had to do with catfish in Auburn. And it's called an in-pond raceway. And what it does is it allows these fish, instead of being produced in the whole pond itself, it's more in about a third of the pond, and it circulates the water. So it actually keeps the waste away. It keeps the fish healthier. And they've actually seen where it is producing maybe up to a 10% increase in the total poundage coming out of those ponds.
The fish protein demand continues to grow.
You know, everybody hears by the year 2050 we're going to have to double our food supply. Well, fish is actually surpassed beef of being the number one meat consumed in the world. So especially in those areas where the huge population is going to be coming from, their number one choice of meat most of the time is fish. So the more soy we can teach these people to feed their fish is only going to help our business in the future.
But it's also the feed rations for any type of species in the aquaculture industry. I would assume that's pretty different and pretty complex too.
Well, it is, because, you know, there's over 1,500 different species of fish. Each species takes a different diet. It's not like feeding a chicken or a hog or a beef worldwide. You know, you can get by with one or two rations and come out pretty good. Here, a catfish or a tilapia can take 40 to 50% soy in their diet. And there's other marine species that can only tolerate a 5 or a 10% blend of soy in there. We're attempting to figure out how we can utilize more soy in those diets.
Those were the comments of John Ray, Kansas Soybean Commission's Representative 2 and Vice Chairman of the Soy Aquaculture Alliance. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi there, as always. Thanks, Greg. And we'll return in just a moment. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now, and once more, it's our weekly horticulture segment. And at long last, we can legitimately talk about lawn maintenance because spring is coming fairly soon. Joining us once more is turfgrass horticulturist Jared Hoyle of K-State Research and Extension for some things you can get after reasonably soon here without jumping the gun too much, particularly in managing your cool season lawns. But first, Jared, we're not entirely done with winter, or at least cold temperatures. One can still inflict frost damage on their lawns if they're not careful out there, you say.
That's correct. So right now, this time of year, we're going to have the fluctuating temperatures. We may have some warmer days and colder days. But as we start approaching more springtime weather, we still will have those nighttime temperatures that get low, and we could have some frost still on the turf. And during that time, you want to try to avoid walking, driving on that grass. You know, when it frosts, there's ice crystals formed on the leaves. The water, the fluid inside the leaves could freeze, and so when you walk on it, you just bust that tissue. So you will have visual damage from it. The good part about it is this time of year, we are going to start warming up, and so that damage will be short-lived. With the temperatures, it will recover. But the least damage you can do to it now, the easier it is for it to recover later on.
With one further point on this, though, if that turf is moist or wet, and we've had plenty of moisture around, one could actually cause compaction problems if they're not careful.
That is correct. So even if there is no frost, and if the ground is soft, especially the surface with walking on it right now, there's going to be no actively growing roots in it to help decompact or break up that soil. So we would just be setting ourselves up for issues with irrigation or watering in the summertime and just an unhealthy plant during the summer.
So stay off of that grass for a while is the point here. We are, though, Jared, on the verge of March, as hard as that is to believe. In as far as our cool season grasses, what should homeowners be thinking about now in the early stages of management?
Well, right now, in this time, once we do warm up and the ground thaws out a little bit, speaking of compaction, if you do have some compacted areas, especially in heavy clay areas or areas that you may have done construction or you've had equipment drive over, it's a good time to go and aerify and try to decompact that soil. The temperatures will warm up. It'll help with root growth, and if you're doing anything else to the lawn, then it would just benefit that lawn getting air and water to it when we do receive rainfall.
As long as the soil has thawed to the extent where one can actually run that aerifier.
That is correct. So the easiest way, take a screwdriver out there and just push it in the ground and see how far you can get down. 2 to 3 inches would be great. Sometimes depending on the soil and the machine that you're using, you may not be able to get that deep, but 2 to 3 would be optimal.
All right. For those fighting broadleaf weeds in their lawns, for those especially who treated last fall, there may be escapes, or for those who didn't treat last fall, you say it might be optimum to enact some broadleaf weed control here soon.
That's correct. So we really like to do our broadleaf post-emerge herbicide applications in the fall. We get really good control, but like anything else, it's not always perfect. There could be some escapes. We could have missed some spots if we spot sprayed in the fall, or if we didn't get an application out, or if it's a new property. Now is a better time than any other time with some of the cooler temperatures that, not hot during the summer above 90. We can go out and spot spray those broadleaf weeds, try to get those out of there so then your turf is healthier and less competition coming through the springtime and the summer.
So what's likely to present itself here soon? Dandelions, for instance?
Dandelions, your winter broadleaf weeds will still be there. Sometimes at this point you won't get as much control with the winter annual broadleaf weeds, but as soon as it warms up they will go away. But dandelions is one of the major concerns that we look for at this time.
Jump on those as soon as you can before they become irritating in the springtime. For those drier areas, and we do have some dry spots around Kansas, does one want to think about throwing a little water at that cool season turf?
That's correct. So depending on where you're located, you could be super saturated or you could be very dry. This time of year is a good time to start training your turf for the summertime heat. So if there is some dry areas, you can irrigate on warmer days when the soil temperatures warm up, and then that will really help that turf to get a jump start and be able to make it through the summertime. Now, try not to overwater or water too frequently. That'll promote just shallow root systems, and then that turf will consistently be wanting that amount of water through the summertime. So we like the deep and infrequent, let it go until you maybe see some wilting, and then at that point that's when you water, and then just let it go again until the wilting shows back up, instead of putting it on a schedule of a Monday, Wednesday, Friday type of thing.
All right. Well then, at first signs of fescue or other cool season green up, fertilization, what is your thinking on that?
We really like fall fertilization when it comes to cool season grasses, especially tall fescue. If you follow the common recommendations, that late November application keeps that tissue green, more green throughout the wintertime, and then it's stored and ready to go as soon as it warms up. Maybe you missed that fertilization, or you can't help it and you got to get some or want to get some out there. It's not necessarily needed, but if you are going to put a fertilizer out, you want to put a pound of nitrogen, but you want to make sure it's a slow release. We don't want to give it too much top growth and not any root growth, because the soil temperatures are still cold, the air temperatures are warm. Where in fall, it's the opposite. The air temperatures are getting cooler, the soil temperatures are warm, so it's growing a very strong root system. And so over-fertilizing in the springtime can produce a flush of top growth, and we think that, we're doing really well, but then we'll be struggling in the summertime. So if you are going to fertilize it, make sure that you use 1 pound nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, and make sure it is definitely a slow-release source.
Very well. One final thing here, and back to weed control. How soon should one be thinking about a pre-emergence product? You're going to temper that enthusiasm for the time being, you say.
That's correct. We are not quite to the window of applying pre-emerge herbicides for the summer annual weeds, especially crabgrass and your foxtails, with a preventative type herbicide. So we like to look at about middle of April right around when the forsythias bloom, but not quite yet. Just make sure that you're planting but not applying.
Stand pat for now on that. Well, with the weather changing soon, we hope anyway, we will have you back with more regularity to talk about turfgrass management, as there'll be plenty of topics to cover. Jared, thank you for coming over.
Thank you.
Turfgrass horticulturist Jared Hoyle of K-State Research and Extension with us on this week's horticulture segment. And that caps off today's edition. Thanks for listening in, and please rejoin us this same time tomorrow, won't you? Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over this, the K-State Radio Network.